welcome to everyone, and a particularly warm welcome to our, well, so far we have 3 speakers with us today. We will also be welcoming Kerri Canepa, she's a lay minister with Hilfield Franciscan Friary, and she's actually running a church service at the moment. So she's going to be arriving late and will join us when she can. But in the meantime, warm welcome to Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, who many of you will already know. But for those who don't, Rinpoche is world-renowned Buddhist master and teacher, a professor of Tibetology. I won't say too much because last time I saw him teach, he cut short the praise that was given to him. But praise is really worthy. Like, I have so much respect for Ringu Tulku Rinpoche. I don't even know where to start. And I'm really, really honoured that Rinpoche has joined us today. And Rinpoche has always had an interest in interfaith matters, and also comes from a school within Tibetan Buddhism, so the Rinpoche model, which is like an ecumenical movement within Tibetan Buddhism. So to not be partisan and to look at accepting of difference is in Rinpoche's style, and it's very much something that is a way that I really like to approach the gospel, and is in the spirit of this meeting today. So welcome, Rinpoche. Jim Manganiello, who I don't know very well yet. I'm looking forward to Jim's talk, and we've had one long Zoom conversation. Jim got in touch with me having read my website on the Gospel of Mary, and I was halfway through a Buddhist retreat at Palpung in Wales, and we had connected over the meeting point of Tibetan Buddhism, particularly in the Dzogchen tradition, and of Jungian psychotherapy and the Gospel of Mary. And that's such an unusual sort of mixture of 3 things, but makes perfect sense. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing what Jim has to bring to the subject. And then we have Joe Blake, who also has Jungian connections, but for the last 4 years has been working on a project as a storyteller, as a multidisciplinary performance artist. And Joe has produced a performance which is dance and storytelling based all around the story of the Gospel of Mary. And so she brings a woman's voice to bear on the subject, which is very, very welcome. And she brings a felt experience and an in-body experience rather than an overly academic experience, which isn't to say that she isn't highly qualified and is a doctor of storytelling, I believe, Joe. Is that right? Yeah, yeah. And training in Jungian psychotherapy. And then finally, we look forward to being joined by Kerri Canepa, who will bring the Franciscan Christian tradition. She comes from a sort of liberal Christian perspective, and I thought it was really healthy for, as we explore the gospel from 4 quite different perspectives, to bring in a liberal, modern, but traditional Franciscan Christian perspective. And so we'll be exploring the gospel from 4 quite different perspectives. And for 2 years now, I've been running study groups based around a Quaker principle of holding difference, of really celebrating how we can look at a text, or look at anything really, from a multitude of different individual or traditional perspectives, and how that can complement each other rather than being seen to compete for any single correct perspective. I think many of us were trained in school and college to kind of argue for one correct way of looking at things. And I put it to you that maybe life isn't like that, and it's great to learn from holding a multitude of different perspectives at the same time, and And that includes our own. So you may hear things this evening that you disagree with. You probably will hear things that you disagree with. And that's all well and good. I think how the gospel strikes us personally and individually is kind of what matters. And being open to hearing how it is read from different traditions and perspectives. So that's the background to this talk. That's the reason for meeting. Format-wise, we're going to have about 15 to 20 minutes for each of the main speakers, and that will take us to, in UK time, about 8 o'clock, thereabouts. We'll then have a 10-minute break, and after the break, we'll get back together and start out with a kind of panel conversation, because I'm really interested to hear how these perspectives of Jim, Joe, Rinpoche, and Kerri, how they meet with each other and what questions and conversation they might have with each other. And then there'll be time for Q&A, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions to be asked then. I'll think about this. I might suggest, because there's so many people, putting questions in chat and then reading out from those, but we'll see how we go with timing, and I'll let us all know. So if everyone's happy, maybe stick a hand up if for some reason you're not happy, then let us proceed and welcome to the floor, Jim. Jim Manganiello, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Strange. I feel like we've been beamed up to the stage, and I think that the problems we had with getting together is a good indication of the perils of ignoring the complexity of materiality. That somehow is part of what I wanted to talk about today. I am a depth psychologist with a Jungian lean. I'm also a Dzogchen practitioner for many decades. And my work, which I want to note because it provides context, I think, for what I'm going to try and say about in this 15 or 20 minutes. I'm focused on individuation, which is a very deep theme in the Jungian tradition. The Jungian tradition, however, is plagued with the dilemma of being dominated by the intellect. Jung put it well. He made a comment, I'm paraphrasing slightly, thank God, Jung, I don't have to be a Jungian. I suspect Jesus would have the same sentiment. So I think of Jesus' revelation as something a priori to any form, any intellectual consideration. I think of the Gospels in contrast as being in time. I think that our preoccupation with the Gospels is somewhat of a risky affair. I think it's very important on the one hand. This is Gospel of Mary Magdalene is profound. I was inspired and deeply moved. I think there's a tendency to make assumptions, however, that have the potential for leading us astray and avoiding the main dilemma. When a revelation begins to be formalized into a spiritual tradition, an organization, that organization or tradition becomes a box, and the revelation is put in the box, and then centuries go by. The tendency is to mistake the box for the revelation. The revelation is lost, and we spend eons talking about the box. So one thought that I had is that our species has been here for 300 to 600,000 years. The religions we tend to hold in such high regard and spiritual traditions have been here, I think, a max of 3,000 years. Maybe we could throw in a 20,000 year figure as a bonus and we could become very circumspect about becoming too literally involved with any particular tradition that is separated from direct experience. I think the thing that is so profound about the Dzogchen tradition is I liken it to a Copernican-like discovery about the nature of mind, basically a contemplative science discovery. I think it is critical to view it that way so that it can then shake hands with traditions in the West, including Christianity, but most importantly for me in the moment, and to bridge that, the Jungian tradition. The Jungian vision for individuation is temporal and filled with stages, sequential. From the Dzogchen, anything in stages is a nation. There's only one thing that Dzogchen view is that reality is now, period. Full stop, period. Any resorting to thinking is a distraction and a movement away from that direct experience. When we're talking about Jesus' revelation, we have to be very careful that it's got enough experiential potency for us that we don't just create a thick fog of intellectual considerations about so-called Christianity. So one of the things in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene is the idea Jesus noted that there was no such thing as sin, that in actuality it was simply a departure from our true nature, from who we really are. I think that's rather profound. The question then becomes one, however, of we can say that with the intellect and imagine that we understand it. But experientially, it's very, very rare that we are connected to our true nature. And there is an art and a science to doing that. And I get the sense that Jesus would be very happy if we could get focused on that. The issue of whether Mary Magdalene was the disciple who understood because her organ of the heart was open perceptually as an organ for spiritual understanding, that may or may not be true. How can we know? How can we know? The best way of confirming or disconfirming is experiencing it ourselves directly. So where are we in time? David, do I have a few more minutes? Okay. So I'm focused with some very significant Jungian analysts on trying to get an understanding of the interdependence between time and timelessness, and the critical issue of how to negotiate the transition between them. Because when we go from timelessness into time, there's a nasty tendency for us to get amnesia and to lose connection with a direct experience of timelessness or God or the nature of mind or the beloved, whatever we want to call it. So it seems like the task, of course, is to appreciate that the nature of mind is a timeless experience. It's a non-dual experience. And that when we come back into duality, we can't just dismiss it. That we have to attend to the complexity of bringing revelation back into time. I do believe that that's the crux of the issue if we're going to take advantage of what Jesus gave us. I think if we keep talking about it, we keep writing about it, we keep exploring it, we keep doing this, we keep doing that, we keep having conferences about it, you may be more optimistic than me, but it hasn't led anywhere in 2,000 years of significance. Things are even worse today than they were then. And we seem to be sitting on a horrific set of circumstances. So my hope is that we can shed a small flashlight on how wisdom might be able to prevail.
That's a great thought to leave us with there, Jim. Shining a flashlight onto how wisdom might prevail, and I've jotted down loads of things to ponder about what you just said, and I'm also feeling loads of links between what you just said and the text of the gospel, particularly the stuff about timelessness, about the chains of forgetfulness, and how going in and out of a state of timelessness. There's this mention of the chains of forgetfulness, but I also very much hear your stress on direct experience for each one of us, and the primacy of that over and above any text, perhaps, and certainly over and above any individual commentary or translation. So thank you for that. So thank you very much, Jim. And there'll be more opportunity to sort of engage with what you've just said in the panel conversation in a while. But for now, I'll ask you to sort of sit back and I'll introduce Joe Blake. So as I said earlier, Joe, again, coming with a Jungian perspective, but also the perspective of a performance artist who's been working directly with the Gospel of Mary for 4 years now. And I think we'll be really interested to bring her perspective on direct experience as felt in the body, and direct experience as opposed to something that's just read in a commentary somewhere. So anyhow, not want to put words into your mouth. Thank you for joining us, Jim. Thank you for joining us, Joe. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you, Jim, for that. I feel like there's a lot that you just articulated there, which also supports and resonates with what I want to say tonight. I feel slightly intimidated by the depth of experience of this other speakers here, and so I'm bringing, I guess, yeah, I'm bringing with me my experience of working with the Gospel of Mary from no faith background. So when I came to it very much from no knowledge. So what I've written about now is my experience then that came to me through working with it. And just before I go any further, I want to also kind of honor and dedicate this writing that or these words that I'm saying tonight to Janet Adler, who was one of the speakers that when I hosted a series of speakers online exploring the Gospel of Mary, Janet Adler came and spoke at one of those, and she's practiced the discipline of authentic movement for 50 years, which is a process which came out of depth psychology, came out of the work of Jung, but was very much an embodiment practice. It was, how can we bring consciousness to the body? And Janet Adler died last week. So the talk that she gave for our Heresy project was one of the last talks that she gave publicly. And I'm deeply honoured to have had one-to-one time with her leading up to that. And I would encourage anyone here interested in anything that I'm saying in this next 10 minutes to look up the beautiful short film that was made about Janet Adler, which is free on YouTube, and it's called Light. And she found that by going deeper and deeper into the body, the place that she reached was spaciousness and light. So that's Janet. So just to kind of clarify where I'm coming from. So I've spent most of my life working as a storyteller. So I kind of bring with me to the gospel something which feels like a mythic perspective and a somatic perspective. So somatic being of the body. So I also trained as a dancer. So my experience of working with Mary's gospel was Mary and the gospel as a kind of as a myth, as a kind of mythic cultural narrative. So as a storyteller, I spent a lot of time with the oral word, with the spoken word. So my relationship to the written word is quite particular. So for me, the words written on the page are in a way just a moment in time. They are a story caught in one particular moment with one particular pen, one particular person holding the pen. And particularly with the Gospels, I think, again, resonating a bit with what Jim just said, is that there were many years before these Gospels were written in which these stories and these words were passed body to body, mouth to mouth, ear to ear. So they passed on in an embodied transmission. So I kind of regard Mary's Gospel as a moment in time. And like any myth, when I meet it on the page, there's a sense that there's two layers that are at work. There's the top side narrative, the kind of the words, the who did what, who said what, and the translation, the denotative meaning of words. That's a layer. But underneath that, there is a kind of sort of seething underside to these stories, to these myths. And that underside, the something underneath, speaks in the gaps between the words. And it kind of speaks in feeling tone. It speaks in a presence of sensation, of synchronicities, of a sense of meaningful connection, which is just below language. It arrives in the form of gestures when I'm working with the stories in the studio, and in a certain connection to materials or matter that feels like it wants to be involved in the telling of the story. So in the performance that came out of my working with this, which was called the performance called The Witness, there was the use of red thread. So for me, Mary Magdalene spoke partly through red thread. So it's this felt sense of the something underneath, which is my primary guide. So in many respects, I haven't spent that long studying the actual text of the gospel. I mean, obviously I've read it several times, but for me, it was this underneath that I had to stay connected to. And Eugene Gendling came up with this word felt sense. So he works with a practice called focusing, in which he describes the felt sense of something which is known very thickly from experience, but which is difficult to talk about, that might seem illogical, marginal, unconventional, or awkward, and yet it exists. So I was aware, working with the Gospel of Mary, that there are these two elements at work, and they don't always have a logical sense of connection. So there's the words that I'm reading on the page, but the felt sense I've got underneath is something quite different, especially for me in this gospel in relation to the idea of ascent, which I'll talk about in a moment. So there is what is on the page. There is the something underneath that can be known and gleaned through the body. And as Jim has mentioned as well, Christianity is a kind of scriptural religion. It privileges the authority of the page, despite the fact that Jesus himself never wrote anything down. So this was, he was an embodied being and a storyteller. So I also work with the premise that myth is alive and it has something it wants to say. And that myth is alive with unfinished business and unanswered questions. and another Jungian depth psychologist, Robert Romanishin, writing in California, has this lovely line where he says that myth is finished with unanswered questions bequeathed to us by the ancestors. So I feel that my job as a storyteller is to listen for that unfinished business. And through these experiences, recognizing myth as having a top side and an underside, to try and articulate or bring out some of that which is underneath. So for me, that's the kind of interlocked zone of myth and body that I meet Mary's Gospel. And what really drew me towards working with this was actually the real materiality of the Gospel itself. So the material remains of the Gospel, the fragments of papyrus and the etched script and the handwritten words and the scraps of this Gospel being literally living in darkness for well over 1,000 years. And then when they tried to bring it to light, there was the interruption of world wars that kept it on a shelf, and there was a flood in the printing press, and there was the fact that it came into the hands of Carl Jung when he was in his descent and his confrontation with the unconscious, writing his red book. So it's all of that around the Gospel which drew me in more than the content itself, and also the missing pages. So it's what is not there, what is omitted, torn out, decayed, incomplete, cut off mid-sentence. And it's the fact that it was exiled and has been kept out of the temple. These are the things that drew me in. All of the conditions around the Gospel. So when I turn to the content of the Gospel, to the words themselves, I notice immediately a tension between what I read and what I experience. So I know that Mary's Gospel often is described as an ascent narrative, and that there's a portion that's referred to as the ascent of the soul, but my lived experience of Mary is one of descent, kind of going down. And I also know in myself that I've got an immediate tension around the word ascent. Something in me pulls away from it. And why? Because it brings to my mind images of a kind of rising up and out of the body, as if God is something that is up and away and after and not down and in and now. So it feels like it's dangerous. There's a kind of dangerous condemning of down and earthly and carnal, as if the world of matter is matter devoid of spirit in some way. So my lived experience of Mary is going down into the underground, into the flesh, into emotion. And I think of the word humility and its relation to humus, the ground of being, the earth, and the descent into darkness. So when I'm making the performance, I'm following a process of descent. And the darkness that I find myself in feels like the nurturing darkness of the feminine, and the darkness in which seeds split open, ready to make their own ascent into the light. And it makes me think of the poem by Rilke, which I'm just going to read because I feel like poetry is one of the languages of the underneath. It takes us to that place. So he writes, "You darkness from which I come, I love you more than all the fires that fence out the world. For the fire makes a circle for everyone so that no one sees you anymore. But darkness holds it all, the shape and the flame, the animal and myself, how it holds them, all powers, all sight. And it is possible. Its great strength is breaking into my body. I have faith in the night. You darkness from which I come, I love you more than all the fires that fence out the world, for the fire makes a circle for everyone so that no one sees you anymore. But darkness holds it all. That's my experience of the descent with Mary into the darkness that holds it all, the shape and the flame, the animal and myself, how it holds them, all powers, all sight, and it is possible. Its great strength is breaking into my body. I have faith in the night. You know, it feels like the darkness, like I say, in which the seed gestates, and makes me think that, you know, the transformation, metamorphosis is nearly always happens in the unseen places. You know, it happens in the dark. So Mary and the fragments of her gospel, the material remains of her gospel, take me into that kind of whole realm of mother, I suppose. The silent and the silenced, the exiled, divine feminine, which we access through a going in and a down into the worldless experience beneath language. And it's no wonder to me that in the legend of Mary, she ends up in a cave in the dark. This feminine space, this going down and going in, takes me into the intelligence of the body. And I became acutely aware of the heart. And there's this moment, this moment in the gospel when Mary is speaking, asking about the vision, where she's saying, when someone meets you in a moment of vision, is it through the soul that they see, or is it through the spirit? And the teacher answered, it is neither through the soul nor the spirit, but the noose between the two which sees the vision. And in all the translations of the word noose that were very ephemeral and hard to catch hold of, I liked the term the eye of the heart, and I started to refer to it as the eye in the heart. And this led me to a lot of somatic work with the heart, and the research being done by the Heart Math Institute in California, who are uncovering all of this incredible and particular intelligence of the heart, which has its own nervous system and is being referred to as the brain in the heart. There are 40,000 neurons in the heart, and its electromagnetic field extends out further than the brain. And what does it mean to shift consciousness down, further down the body and into the realm of the heart? And even more than that, to expand this sense of mind or nous, not just from the heart, but to the whole body mind, the mind in the body. That it becomes a place of consciousness, of discernment, of art making, of conversation, of thought. You know, as the Gospel of Thomas says, you know, what we say in a body. We can say nothing outside of this body. We must awaken while in this body, for everything exists within it. We must resurrect in this life. Surely it's only through the body that we know anything. So my experience of Mary takes me into the body, and into the body as the meeting place of worlds. So I don't know how much time do I have? Am I done with time, David?
Please keep going, Joan.
I'll just kind of finish it up, because yeah, you know, this is I part of this experience is also kind of about language, I suppose. So I'm aware of it feeling difficult in a way to language some of this experience. You know, what do we do when we've had this direct experience? When we have this direct experience of some kind, And then there is the problem of language, and how do we language it? How do we notice and language direct experience and convey it to others? Because I feel like in some respects, this moment at the end of the gospel, which has fascinated me, the disbelief of Peter and Andrew, or their doubt of Mary when she's told them that ascent of the soul experience is, this language is incomprehensible to them. And I suspect it's because she's using the language of an initiated person to people who are uninitiated, or there's no inner experience on which they can hook or hold on to this language. So it makes me wonder how we guide or convey or speak of direct experience. And in the performance that we made, we have dance, we have materials, we have music, we have poetry, we have atmosphere, which is that whole realm of the feminine around and between and among the words, not just the sense of the words. So I think it's important that we stay connected to that in some way, to keep staying connected to that when we're trying to find this language. And yeah, so I guess just to kind of sort of draw this to some kind of conclusion, and I'm sorry if it's all a bit garbled, but
it's not.
Okay. But I guess my experience of Mary is something of that relates to Jung's idea of the individuated person, or the anthropos, the capacity for wholeness, for holding the whole experience, the dark and the light, something that's messy, something that's human, and something that's whole. And I imagine that she lived it in the flesh of herself, and that something of this remains underneath her gospel, in the journey of its death and its resurrection, and in the power of her name, in the power of Magdalene. And so I wonder what teachings we glean from the gospel if we meditate on the gaps, the missing pages. What if its long gestation under the ground is as much a part of its teaching as the words themselves? What if we pay attention to the fact that it opens on page 7? 7 are the gates that Inanna walked through on her descent to the underworld. 7 are the folds in the skirt of the snake goddess of Sumeria. 7 are Salome's veils. 7 are the chakras. 7 are the demons cast out of Mary. 7 are the climates she wrestled with on her journey. And 7 is the page upon which her gospel starts with the question, what is matter? Matter, mater, mother, Mary, Ma. When I see these things, I feel that God really has a sense of humor and that myth is littered with unfinished business and unanswered questions bequeathed to us by the ancestors. And I wonder if, rather than just studying the written answer that the teacher gives to her question, what is matter, we allow that question to fall into the matter of us, to tune into the fuzzy felt sense in our own bodies, to dwell within our own darkness and see what the very matter of us has to say in response. So I'll leave it there and hope that some of that was comprehensible.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jo. So much depth there to explore. Thank you so much. And I'm picking, much as I like to hold difference, I'm also picking up on sort of a common thread of Jim pointing towards the primacy of direct experience over and above the written word. And that's very much what I'm hearing from you. How do things actually feel? What is it like to actually live this experience rather than just to read a commentary or to read the written word? And then how myth which is so not in the body. We think of myth as being sort of kind of ethereal. You can't touch myth, but that has a direct impact on how we think and feel. And then the myth that is there, partly unspoken within the Gospel of Mary, how that affects us, and of that as being unfinished business. Fascinating. Yes, thank you. So there's plenty to come back to in the panel conversation, and really looking forward to that. But for now, I'd like to introduce again Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, who I'm so happy that you could join us, Rinpoche, and talk from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective. So when I was first attracted to the Gospel of Mary, I think I was struck by some Buddhist parallels that seem to be speaking through the text, and that kind of drew me in. And then over the last 2 years, working with a whole load of students sort of studying this text, it seems to have formed a kind of, it seems to work well as a bridge between the worlds of Christianity and the world of Buddhism. So I'm very interested to hear what Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, what you make of it from your perspective, from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, and that obviously needn't be the same as the Christian perspective. So I'm really keen to hear what the words within the gospel mean to you from that Buddhist perspective. So I will gallery view, and you have unmuted. Brilliant. Over to you, Rinpoche. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And David introduced me to this Gospel of Mary, and asked me to, to say what I think about that. I read the Bible before. I didn't start reading Bible nothing other than to learn my English, because everybody told me that if you want to learn English, you must read Bible. So I read Bible, and it was true. Actually, Bible is the best book to study if you want to learn English, because it's very short sentences, simple kind of words, and very, very good. But when I read the Bible, especially the New Testament about Jesus Christ, I was very inspired by many of the stories of Jesus Christ. Generally speaking, I think this is important if you want to talk about Buddhist perspective. The Buddhist perspective actually is that, there are many different ways. There can be many different ways. There should be many different ways. There can't be only one way, because the people are different. So therefore, there are different people need different paths, different methodologies, different approaches. Therefore, there should be many different approaches and different things. And therefore, also in Buddhism itself, there are many different philosophies, there are many different teachings, there are many different yanas, there are many different kind of different things. And Buddha himself said that it's good. He said that he taught 84,000 different ways. So therefore that a kind of a Buddhist perspective is, I think, the first thing that's very important from Buddhists. And another Buddhist perspective is that, yes, you should yourself, try to find the right path, the right teacher. You should examine them. You should try to, at your best, examine whether that is a genuine one that leads to the right kind of direction and all these things. And you should be very, very, clear about what path you want to take and want to tread and you want to train in. But you should not kind of criticize or say bad things or look, have a negative way of seeing on other paths which are not same with you. Because what you might find and you might feel is very good and very useful and very profound may not be, suitable to somebody else. So therefore, the other ways that is, that's not exactly what you prefer or what you like or what you feel is the right one for you, should also be sometimes very good and useful and, beneficial to many others. So therefore, you have to respect all different paths, different religions, different philosophies and things like that. And therefore, even in like the Vajrayana's kind of a 12 and 14 downfalls, this is one of the downfalls, that you should not look down or criticize any other religion or paths, either among your own kind of school or religion or on others. So this is the most important thing. I think I must say this before I go further. Then when I was given this text, Gospel of Mary Magdalene by David, when I read it, it sounded so much like Buddhist text. There were lots of words there and, different kind of ideas and approaches, which was very similar to that of the Buddhist way of putting it. And so therefore, I said, yes, this all sounds very much similar to Buddhism. And he says, can you kind of give an interpretation of that from the Buddhist point of view? And I said, yeah, from Buddhist point of view, I can easily interpret them because it sounds so similar in many, many things that's said here. That's why I did one, before kind of a talk or, that time we couldn't have a proper discussion, but I try to kind of give my own little bit explanation of the text from a Buddhist perspective. And I could kind of do it very easily because it looked so similar. Now this is, from Buddhist point of view, it is always said that, the teachings can come, very good teachings, very good, guidance, it can come anytime from anywhere. It's not necessarily, like Buddha Shakyamuni is there for us. The Buddhism comes from Buddha Shakyamuni 2,600 years before. And that teaching is what we are now having. But, it's not necessary that this teaching has to be taught by the Buddha. It can come in many different ways, from many different people, because emanations of enlightened beings can be everywhere and can be, can come anytime, and not only from, kind of human beings, but even from nature, from trees, from earth, from everywhere. The right kind of teachings can come out. There is even this tradition in Tibet, which is called termas, that there are many tertuns, there are many kind of what we call treasure finders, that they can find this, texts and different kind of things that is supposed to have been hidden by some great masters like Guru Padmasambhava a long time before. And these kind of teachings are found at the right time when it would be most useful and necessary for the people at that time. So this kind of Buddhist kind of way of thinking perspective is very much there. So therefore, this kind of teachings I found was very fitting to those kind of ideas and those kind of things. So therefore, when I read this a few pages, there I don't know, I don't really understand, what was the exact words used in the original original text, but the translation that I got were very similar to Buddhist. Although, of course, it is not necessary that it has to be similar to Buddhism, that the thing has to be, useful and genuine and beneficial for the people. So here, when I read this, for instance, first thing, is talk about everything is changing and impermanent and things like that. And this is something very, not just similar, but something very, very commonly and repeatedly emphasized in Buddhism, that everything that exists is, is impermanent, is not permanent, is momentary, is changing always. It's changing because everything is not independently existing, but interdependently existing. So therefore, the interdependence becomes a very important philosophy of Buddhism, and it is everywhere. It's right from beginning to end. Although there are many different philosophies in Buddhism also, which could be quite different from each other in some ways, but all of them, talks about this interdependent nature of things. And then also, when you go a little bit down, the way it's the sin is kind of explained is also very much in kind of tune with the Buddhist way of seeing, because Buddha's kind of way of understanding sin is also coming from a wrong view, coming from a kind of, not saying things rightly and clearly, and then, habit forming and way of looking at that. And that's why, all these things, it's, it could almost be a Buddhist text, And then we talk about this, suffering coming from, attachment and all kind of these things. Different, of course, it's a little bit different way of defining and things like that. But these are also very similar to the Buddhist way of understanding, ignorance, then, attachment, and then kind of all these negative emotions in the wrong way of seeing and things like that. Kind of, from the Buddhist point of view, these negative kind of state of being or state of mind or state of experiences is the one that, that brings pain and suffering and problem to individuals, and that brings, problem and difficulties and disharmony and all the negative things into the society, things like that. So therefore, if one can kind of be released from them, if one can free oneself from these kind of state of being, state of mind, or then one can cultivate, a peace, the peace that, enlightened beings have experienced. So therefore, peace be with you, cultivate my peace within yourself, things like that. When you say it kind of, it also reflects those kind of understandings. So therefore, actually, almost there's nothing which cannot be kind of described in a very complete Buddhist way of understanding and thinking. So therefore, I was quite impressed, you can say. That doesn't mean that if it is not exactly like the Buddhist way of thinking or Buddhist way of saying, it's not good or it's not right or it's not useful. It's not like that, but this is very much like that. So, I don't know what can I say more than that. It is just something, whatever comes to my mind, I said it. And of course, this is not a complete text. Many parts are missing. So therefore, we don't know exactly what is there in these missing parts. And but it's very, very interesting from the Buddhist point of view, because some of the things here seem to be not exactly like you will find, at least in the way it is said in the Bible. That's what I thought.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche. And we just have a few more minutes before sort of timetable to pass on to Kerri. One thing I'd like to just ask you to explain a little more. So for someone that hasn't come across emptiness and independence as concepts, could you explain why emptiness and interdependence are thought to be so important within Buddhism? And I think you've got about 4 or 5 minutes to just expand a bit on, because this is what it starts with. Is it starts with we live in this world where matter is temporary, where it doesn't last forever, and it's interdependent. And then later on in the Gospel of Mary, there's as the soul is ascending, it's released from ignorance, and by saying, I've realized that everything's temporary and doesn't last forever. And so then this is such a strong thing within Buddhism. Perhaps you could explain for those of us who don't have that background a little more on emptiness and interdependence, what it means.
That's exactly, like from Buddhist point of view, the reason why we react with all this, too much greed, too much attachment, too much, hatred and, jealousy and all kind of things, and then we make so much trouble for others and for ourselves, is because of ignorance. That's how it is said, because we don't understand what's the nature of things, what's the nature of ourselves. So therefore, we think that, all these things are kind of independently existing, they are truly exist, they are always there. So therefore, what I seem to say is something nice, I must fight for it, I must run after it, I must get it, I must hold on to it. And something that I feel is not so nice to me, I must get rid of it, I must kind of run away from it, things like that. And that can only be, that state of being, state of mind, state of experiencing, it can only be changed or transcended or transformed if we know what is the true reality of how the things really exist. So then, if we want to understand how things really exist, then we have to see, is this permanent or impermanent? Is this always there or always not there? And how these things, what is, how does all these things exist? So therefore, all this impermanence, interdependence, dependently existing, relatively existing, and then slowly kind of emptiness and all those things come into understanding, these issues come into being. And because if we really understand them very clearly, how things exist, then that can kind of reduce our wrong way of saying things. And that is kind of a light, because it's not darkness. Darkness is usually in every community or in every kind of tradition is kind of depicting the ignorance, that you don't understand. It's like, in the darkness, you don't see things clearly. So light is always kind of interpreted as something that you see clearly and you understand, without any problems. So therefore, when this ignorance is cleared, and then this understanding of not only intellectually but experientially understanding happens, then all this craving or whatever, all these different kind of ignorance, then what is there, kind of all these things that are mentioned here will be, will dissolve by itself. So therefore, it kind of, you come to the light, you ascend, whatever you call it, it doesn't matter, but, whether it's going up or going down, doesn't matter, but you will be freed from kind of problems and sufferings and difficulties. And so you know how to deal with things within yourself. You will know how to deal with things without. And then so more compassion, kindness, all these things come because, why we don't have enough compassion and kindness and love to each other, or why don't we treat each other with so much kind of kindness and compassion and love, is because of too much, too much attachment and too much craving and too much, kind of holding on to the way we wrongly understand, the way we wrongly see. So that's the Buddhist way of understanding. So this kind of words that we have, a few words we have here, seem to kind of say almost all of them.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche. So we'll look forward to yourself and Joe and Jim joining in panel conversation after the break later, and really look forward to that conversation. I'm sure there's going to be really interesting things to be talked about. Before that, we have Kerri has joined us hot from leading an evening church service in Dorset. So Kerri is a licensed lay minister and lives with Hilfield Franciscan community in Dorset, and brings a really welcome liberal Christian perspective to the table. I'm very keen to hear another different point of view on how the Gospel of Mary strikes her, what it means to her, and how she reads the text. So I can't see you on my screen, but I have every faith that you're there, Kerri.
I am.
Hooray! Oh, relief. Welcome, Kerri, and the table's yours.
Thank
Take it
you.
away.
Thank you. I am American, so no, I'm not Irish. People think I'm Irish, but I'm not. I'm an American. And I've been living at Hilfield Friary, which is an intentional Christian community based around a core body of currently 5 Franciscan friars. They're men. And then there's another 20 or so of us that live alongside them. This is a kind of a medium-sized retreat center. So the other people who live with the friars actually help run this place. So go have a look at our website if you're curious about us. It's Hilfield, Hilfield, Hilfield Friary. Go have a look. We do all kinds of different things, and it's certainly worth a look. And if you're anywhere near the area, please stop and see us. We'd be happy to have you come. David has come several times, so he's familiar with the place. I will say, David asked me to give you kind of a Christian perspective, but I have to give you a caveat, because while I was born into a Christian family, I left the church when I was 19. And then there was many years where I was not following Christianity at all. And then when I was 43, I had a conversion experience where God kind of crashed into my life, and I kind of returned to that. But because I did not, I wasn't paying attention to Christianity during those years of my life, I pretty much forgot most of my childhood Christianity stuff. You know, what had been taught about what things meant and those sorts of things. They pretty much gone away. I didn't remember very much of it. So it's kind of a clean slate, but maybe not exactly. So when I went and got back involved in the church, it was with the maturity to ask questions about the faith and about what people were teaching and what the doctrine was. And so it's been a very interesting experience over these last, about 20 years now. It's been a little over 20 years. And a very interesting experience about what I have gotten to the point where I can now ask better questions. So when I first read the Gospel of Mary, I don't remember whose translation of it is, but I did read it. And I thought, this is astonishing. This stuff is amazing. And I have had a, I guess you can call it kind of a devotion to Mary Magdalene for a long time. So reading that, which is new to me, I had never heard of this. And having read this, I thought, okay, there's a lot to this. I mean, it's not part of the Christian canon. It's a later document, but it's also incomplete. And but to me, it was like, yeah, but it's still valuable. You know, it's still got a lot of value in terms of what, you know, in the Christian church. For instance, one of the things that's very interesting is that I will freely admit on behalf of the Christian church that we have done Mary Magdalene wrong. I mean, we have labeled her all sorts of things that she was not. We have talked about her and around her, and not given her the credit that she actually should have. And so, I will apologize on behalf of the Christian church for maligning her for so many years. However, I'm in the Anglican tradition, so which is, and then I would say I'm in the more liberal branch of that, but conservative. I'm conservative in the right sort of way. Conservative is not in the more political sense of conservative, and so it's very interesting because in the Anglican Church and also in the Roman Catholic Church, her feast day was on the 22nd. That was yesterday, and she is held in very high esteem in the church. I mean, there's and many churches are named after her. Like, in fact, my local church down the road is dedicated to Mary Magdalene, and it's a lovely little church. So it's, despite the fact that, you know, various popes and various writers over the centuries have given her attributes that really aren't there, the church does actually hold her in great esteem. And the reason they hold her in great esteem is because she is recorded as having the first conversation with Jesus after his resurrection. So she, in the Gospel of John, there's a whole conversation between her and Jesus where she goes to the tomb and it's empty, and she goes back and tells the disciples that it's empty, and they come and check, and sure enough, it's empty. And then she comes back, sees a couple of angels who are like, "Why are you here?" And she goes, "Where is he? Tell me where he is and I'll go take him away." Turns around and it's Jesus behind her. And Jesus says, "Who are you looking for?" And she doesn't recognize him, that's of course caused a lot of great commentary about why, but she doesn't immediately recognize him. And then he says her name, he says Mary. And then she does recognize him. And she is told by him to go back to the disciples and tell them that he will go and meet them. He said, like he said he would meet them back in Galilee. And so she goes and takes that message back to this group of despondent men and says, "I've seen the Lord, and this is what he told me." And so she is called the apostle to the apostles. So she was the one who brought the good news of that resurrection to them. So that's why in the Christian church she is given such high esteem, is that she's the first one. She's the one who's recorded as having the first sighting and the first conversation with Jesus after his resurrection. So despite the fact that we've done her wrong in other ways, she's still held in very, very high esteem. Personally, she's very near and dear to my heart. So from that perspective, you can, I could say that she's, I don't know how many, I think probably most people that would have, because she gets conflated with other people and the whole thing about being a prostitute and that sort of thing. I'm not sure how many people would, if you just asked them who Mary Magdalene was, would be able to just say she was the apostle to the apostles. That's something within the church. But if your level of understanding about the Christian faith is what you learned when you were a child at school, then you probably thought she was a prostitute, or she was, in some way a sinner or something like that. And what's often the emphasis on her in the church is on her repentant nature, that she knew that she was a sinner and that she could repent of that and be wholly loved, completely loved by Jesus. And that's good news for most people, I think, to say that, no matter how rotten and crummy and terrible I am, God still loves me. But that doesn't, but that kind of like, that kind of dumbs down who she was and how she actually was, you know, how her influence in that group and what she brought to that group, you know, what her influence was in that group. And sometimes the church is not good about that. You know, it's not good about acknowledging her, you know, the fact that she supported Jesus and she was there and she was very close, and you know, how that supported his ministry, but also what sort of ministry did she have? You know, what sort of ministry did all the disciples have? I mean, there's a don't remember which book, but in one of the books there's talks about Jesus sending out pairs of disciples, like to all the places he was going to go visit, and he gave them all the authority that he had to cast out demons, heal people, bring the good news to the poor. I mean, all the stuff he was doing. He said, and now you have it. So she had it. No, she probably was going around too, you know, to these villages and these places and doing that, healing people and casting out demons, proclaiming the good news that the kingdom of God was near. And we tend to lose sight of that. And I'm going to switch gears, because one of the things that I looked at when I've read the Gospel of Mary, and one of the things I pulled out of it as a Christian, is that Jesus told his disciples, and it's in the Gospel of Mary, go out and preach this good news, tell people about this. This is good news, and it said twice, you know, in the Gospel, and it's like, okay, from a Christian perspective, and also in the Bible itself, in the Gospels in the Bible, it says Jesus commissioned the apostles, the disciples, to go out and proclaim this. And so that's a big part of the Christian faith, is that sense of evangelism, to go out and proclaim. And so when I was looking at the Gospel of Mary, it's very much wisdom literature. It talks about the soul's ascent. It talks about how, you know, what Rinpoche said, which was about not clinging to things, with the impermanence of things. It's full of that, and that's absolutely useful. However, what I was looking at was, how can that, what Jesus is talking about and what Mary relates, how can that inform Christians to go out and proclaim that good news? Yeah, so instead of it being entirely an inner development thing to help you go do it. I mean, it's like, how can it help? What about this is going to help you go out and talk about Jesus's ministry and what Jesus was all about? And so I kind of leave that out there, because it's not given to you in that text, but it's like, how did that work? I mean, how did what was recorded in this text get used by the apostles, the disciples, Mary herself, to go out and proclaim? I mean, what did it do? And I think that's something that we don't think about very much, at least in the Christian church. We don't think about that too much. But it's not just a text for inner development, it's also a text that can be used to go out, to do outward work. And I think that would be a very interesting conversation. You know, how does it happen like that? And what is the good news? You know, what good news are we proclaiming? You know, and so that's kind of what I have to say. Unless, David, you have a question or prompt or something.
Find the right button to press for a start. Thank you, Kerri. One thread I'm picking up on is this sort of confusion over directions of going out, going up, going down, going sideways, and maybe there's some sort of clarity to bring to what we mean when we point to a direction. And there's a particular question that I have, and I don't know, maybe I don't know if you'll know the answer to this. So we've sort of mentioned earlier, the other three people mentioned earlier about sort of the how there's no original sin in the Gospel of Mary. And then I was amazed to read recently that there's like a 12th century Franciscan theologian, John Duns Scotus, who had this real emphasis on original goodness. And
Yes.
that being like really embedded within the Franciscan tradition. And I think some of us who moved away from the Christian church felt perhaps a little burnt by this kind of notion of original sin. And yet within Franciscans, you have this understanding of original goodness and an emphasis on that, and have done for hundreds of years. Could you sort of, while you've got the mic, say a few words about that? Sorry to put you on the spot with that one.
I don't know a huge amount about Duns Scotus, but I do know he was a Franciscan scholar. Original blessing is, yeah, that was a big deal for him. Original sin actually kind of came later. It was a later development and probably came out of Augustine. So it wasn't an early church, a very early church. I mean, early church in the sense that we're now 2000 years on the other side of it, but the very earliest church didn't really have a concept of that, because Judaism doesn't have a concept of original sin. And so there was, you know, in Judaism, the words for sin are more like missing the mark, or not quite getting to, you're getting for what you aim for. So you made a mistake somewhere along the line. So it's not, there was the way that the Christian view of sin developed over the centuries is very, very different from its roots from Judaism. So yes, thank goodness for, you know, thank God for Duns Scotus, who kind of was like a corrective to that. It was kind of going, actually, you know, if you look at all this stuff, it's all about goodness. And when you look at, I've done something called Havruta, which is where you sit with somebody else and you discuss it's a Jewish form of study. You sit with your Havra, which is your friend, and you do Havruta, which is you have a conversation about the text. And it's very interesting to do that, because you can ask the text all kinds of questions. And the only rule is you can't change the text, but you can ask it any question you like. You know, why is it like this? Why is it said that word? Why are these two words repeated? You know, and one of the things about a Havruta about Genesis, which is where the concept of original sin comes out of, is that from a Judaism perspective, it's about rebellion. It's about the fact that, you know, Adam and Eve chose to rebel against God. God said, here it is, it's all there, you know, take care of it. And they went, no, we think we know better. And so for Judaism, that story is more about rebellion, not about a personal issue within yourself that you're broken somehow. It was more about a decision to rebel against God. So, and that might have been part of the early church's understanding of that text. But over time, and then you get Augustine, who did talk about sin, and I think he was probably the author of the concept of original sin, and it just sort of got traction and then kind of went on from there. But I haven't done enough study in it to go, you know, give you absolutes and this, that, and dates, and I don't know all that.
Thank you. And you brought up something which I think in the conversation later we can tie in with Joe, which is the idea that myth is to be seen in context and is something that understandings of that change throughout time. So what you've really helped me see there is how an understanding of the Genesis myth is important to see, and the sense of sin within a Jewish perspective, and how that can be different from perhaps the one that we inherited with the schoolboy version of Christianity that I grew up with. And how it's not that simple. There are nuanced levels, and that changes throughout time. So thank you. Sorry I do apologize for putting you on the spot there with that question, but I'm really grateful for your response to that. What I suggest we all do now is let's have a sort of 15-minute break, time for water out, water in, as they say. It's 5 to whatever the hour is, depending on where you are, except for Nikita in Nepal, where it's probably something completely different. But We're meeting again in 15 minutes. And in the meantime, there was a Sufi poem that, Jim, do you want to say a couple of words about this? And I can put it up for people to reflect on during the break. Jim.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I keep going. My sound keeps getting muted automatically. This is a quote by Ibn Arabi, and I think it speaks directly to the experience that Jesus was giving voice to and heart to. So I thought it would be something for us to consider, perhaps, and to contextualize it in the dilemma of experiencing God in Ibn Arabi's terms, in the Christian sense, in the Dzogchen terms, the nature of mind, Rigpa. And then coming back from that experience and being able to savor it and have it make a significant difference in our life in time embodied without deceiving ourselves.
Superb. Thank you. Well, I'll put that Sufi poem up now.
Wonderful.
We'll take a break
you,
and then meet back again at 10 past. And
Thank you
we
so
might
much.
like to use that as a starting point for our panel discussion. So see everyone again in 13 minutes. Thank you. The joy for me of this evening, very much like the friendly study groups that I host, is I had no idea what to expect. So it's fascinating to kind of hear how this is developing, and I have no idea what to expect about how the next 50 minutes will develop, but I can guarantee it's going to be interesting. So maybe we'll make a start and Jim can join us because time's moving forward. Well, I'll throw this open to Kerri, Joe, and Rinpoche. Do you have any questions to ask each other about what you've heard and from each other's perspectives? Kerri, Joe, or Rinpoche, any questions for each other?
I have to admit that I wasn't here for Joe and Jim, so I don't really have any, I'm not sure I can ask any questions from them. And I'll sit here with thinking about what Rinpoche said.
So I could bring something up, and what comes to mind was Rinpoche mentioned about what is useful, genuine, and beneficial. And I know, Kerri, for you have this concern that sometimes spiritual matters can become a bit kind of airy-fairy in the spiritual world and a bit sort of introspective, and there's a Franciscan focus on what's useful and beneficial in the real world. And I also heard Joe kind of having an emphasis on, how does these things happen in our real lives? So I'd throw that open to comment. Joe, perhaps you'd like to expand on that theme of the difference between what's useful and beneficial in practical real life, as opposed to what's kind of disappearing up, ascending out into this sort of spiritual ether land. Perhaps Joe, you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can comment on that exactly, but I'm I realise that there's something that Kerri said at the end of her talk that resonated with me. I don't know if it's formulated yet into a question, but it was this and maybe it's sort of, or perhaps it's relating a bit to what you just said as well, David, but it was something to do with proclaiming, like how you take this experience out into the world and how you speak it and communicate it, what is being communicated. And I've been I think a lot about that moment in Mary's gospel of in a way, this sort of this moment where she's told them, she's given the vision, and she's and it's not in the language of parable, it's not in the language of story, it's this language of soul and climates or authorities and resting in the eternity of time, and it's this sort of feeling, and Andrew and Peter's response is, what are you talking about? Like, what is that? And so there's like a breakdown of communication in that moment, and that Mary hasn't conveyed to them her experience. So she's experienced something, a teaching, but there's this problem of communicating that. And I think about that, I think about that in relation to Christianity and this that's built into the religion of, which is to go out and proclaim, and that feels different to, I think, what I heard Rinpoche saying about the Buddhist experience of kind of respecting all of these, many pathways to this experience. So I don't know, I'm struck with that. I don't know if there's a question that comes out of that, but I just sort of offer that into the mix.
Yes, Rinpoche.
Yes, I think, this from Buddhist point of view, what is to be proclaimed, what is to be proclaimed is the teaching of the Jesus. Yeah, the Jesus, at least from the Buddhist point of view, it's like that. The Buddha gave some teachings, and the teachings that the Buddha gave was on how to transform yourself, how to liberate yourself, how to help yourself. And that is the message of the Buddha. And that is what to be proclaimed. So from my point of view, this very teaching that, Jesus supposed to have given to Mary is what's to be proclaimed, because that would help people to ascend from the, from the difficulties and sufferings and problems, and free themselves from ignorance and craving and all the problems that is causing suffering and pain problem in people. So that's exactly what is to be proclaimed. I think from that point of view, the proclamation is not just that there is Jesus, but Jesus is a message. And Jesus' message has to be something that is essential teachings. And this is what his essential teaching is. That's from my point of view.
Thank you. Yeah, Kerri, please.
What's interesting is that within the church, proclamation is generally, well, and I think probably just immediately people who know about Christianity, is that people are going to come to your door and say, are you saved? You know, and try to sell you a bill of goods about how it's wonderful to be, you know, a Christian. What I'm using from proclamation is, it could be much broader than that. I think that Rinpoche is right. It's the teachings that need to be proclaimed. But I think it's interesting living with Franciscans, because I listen to their rule. They read from their book, their rule every at the end of every morning prayer, and you read, and it's somebody had a great idea. They broke it into 30 days, and so every day we hear a bit of it. And so I've been living here for 11 years now. I've got this thing almost memorized just by listening to it so much. But there is something about that it is the witness of one's life that is the proclamation. So it's like if the Franciscans are modeling Jesus's selflessness and his poverty and his, you know, his the good news is that of course that you are loved. That's part of the good news, is that it's the witness of their life is more eloquent than words. So that what the proclamation means, at least from where I live, is that Franciscans go out into the world and work alongside people. And they do it out of a sense of selflessness and a desire to help and out of love for the people that are doing it. They're not trying to convert anybody to anything. They're just coming alongside and being, being alongside people where they are, in whatever situation, whatever faith or no faith they have. They just come alongside and are there as a presence, and in a way a witness to what Jesus was teaching people and what Jesus's life was about, which is selflessness and self-giving. And so I think in some ways that's what I mean by proclamation. So in a way, I suppose you could if you look at the Gospel of Mary, it's like, how can that inform your life to go out and proclaim it? You know, and so from Franciscans, it's how you live your life. That's the proclamation. And how can you do that? And there's so many different, I mean, it's like as many situations as there are, that can be where Franciscans can come alongside. Some of the brothers in this order are involved with asylum seekers. They work with asylum seekers. Other people work with the homeless. Some work at food banks, you know, and so they just go alongside. They don't talk about Jesus. They don't, unless somebody asks them, but they don't, that's not the point. That's not why they're there. They're not trying to convert anybody. And in fact, that's in the rule. You know, you're not, you know, it's like, that's not the point. So it's, you know, what is the proclamation? And in the Franciscan translation of that, it's, we live our lives the way Jesus told us to live our lives, in simplicity and in love and in care for everything. And so, so that's their proclamation by the life that they live.
Thank you, Kerri, and bring us back to sort of direct experience, rooting the teaching in a demonstration, in a practical demonstration, and in direct experience. And just quickly adding that proclamation is clearly really important in the Gospel of America. It's one of the few things that's mentioned twice, is go out and spread the good news. And for anything to be mentioned twice, that must have been there's an emphasis on there. Jim, anything to add on the subject of proclamation?
Did I miss the post? Did you put the Ibn Arabi up?
I put that up over the break, yes.
You did?
I did.
Yeah, my sense is, give me your briefest version if you can, so I can be precise. What do you mean by proclamation?
I think we mean each of us mean different things. So Kerri's just...
I'm assuming you mean what Jesus proclaimed, correct?
I would read the question within the Gospel of Mary and within the instructions for disciples, which is to go out and spread the good news. So rather than just to be concerned with one's own liberation, to then take that and share one's insights, one's access to liberation with others, with the wider world. That's my reading of it.
So again, did you see The Bride of Frankenstein?
No.
You didn't?
No.
It's a fantastic Mel Brooks movie. Just to capture an image, if we can. Gene Hackman is a blind priest. Peter Boyle is a very heartful, wonderful Frankenstein. And Peter Boyle stumbles on his cabin, and Gene Hackman says, "My God, I have company. Come in, my brother." And he sits him down and he offers him soup. And he prepares the soup, he brings it to Peter Boyle as Frankenstein, and he proceeds to pour it on his crotch. And Peter Boyle he should have gotten an Academy Award just for his comedic ability, his facial expressions. And he then accepts it, and Gene Hackman offers him a cigar. Peter Boyle says, "Oh, cigar." And Gene Hackman, as the blind priest, proceeds to light his thumb on fire. I'm thinking of that's what people did to Jesus. So I'm kind of on another frequency, and I ask your forgiveness, anybody whom I'm insulting, but I come back to my main point. We don't know what happened. One thing Jesus proclaimed that strikes me is worthy of the most immense focus possible, and that's the Father and I are one, which is the exact point of Ibn Arabi's poem. What we have made of that proclamation is just stupendous lunacy. We think we understand what he meant. We think that kindness and loving and all of which are very important, but I think we've got to set up shop around why is it that nobody can do unto others? Jesus is correct from what Mary Magdalene's gospel says. It's not a sin. It's not because we're bad people, but because we're not aligned with that proclamation that the Father and I are one, that the Father is our very source. We are none other than the Father. We can experience that, definitely experience it, and not set up shop wondering what this gospel meant, that gospel meant, who did this, what we do, all of which is important in some context. But if what we're talking about is actually going surfing, is going from Boston to California to surf in California, we have to be very careful that our GPS is going to drop us off in Idaho and say, you've arrived at your destination. We need to experience the Father and I are one. Believing in it, getting caught up in all these boxes, whether they're Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, is a very tricky turn. Everybody's got a right to their own view. There's many different paths, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, are we at the ocean or not? Can we surf here? Now, Dzogchen, the beauty of Dzogchen, if we liberate it from any kind of cultural constraints, including Tibet, it is a absolutely profound discovery about a part of the mind that we walk right by. We don't realize it's there. It's unconscious, not in the Freudian sense that we've got unconscious parts of our mind that are bad and repressed, but we're not aware of them because we can't tune into them. and we falsely identify with this sense of an I or me that is purely fictional, whether it becomes a murderer or whether it becomes a doer of good acts, it's a fiction. So there are very precise methods for experiencing the fact, the truth, rather, that the Father and I are one. That is the call deep, deep, deep in the soul. We don't know what's in our mind until very often we project it. We project it onto people, onto teachers, onto traditions, onto churches, onto organizations, so on and so forth. I think Jesus' proclamation was that we have to take ownership of that. We have to discover that. Until or unless we do, everything else is stuff.
Thank you, Jim. Again, bringing it back to direct experience in a way. So thank you. So it's just gone past now. I'd invite anyone else in the audience that has a question to put to the panel. If you put your cartoon hand up, because I can't actually see everyone at the same time, but that's the way that I think you sort of jumped to the front of my screen. So if anyone's got a question to put to anyone, then first one that's come up is Ella Rosette. Would you like to unmute and put your question to the panel, Ella?
David, question for Rinpoche and maybe everybody. There's been talk about the ascent of the soul and the liberation of suffering or from suffering. And my question is, having been on the path for 40 years, and a lot of my friends also, we're starting to think, well, is that really possible? What is actually possible? And maybe, and I know in the Buddhist and even more so the Hindu sense, it's like, yes, just because it's possible to really ascend for good, to free ourselves from suffering, doesn't mean it's going to happen in one lifetime. It might take 100 more lifetimes, who knows? But so that's my question, because also I was working intensely with David for a long time on the ascent of the soul, and we always found, like, yeah, you think you've ascended, you think you've gotten somewhere, and then boom, you fall, you stumble and fall and descend right back into darkness, and then you struggle to get up again, and then you fall again. So what's possible in one lifetime? What if we, yeah, that kind of is the question, I guess. Well, how to deal with this. And maybe, I guess some teachers would say, and a lot of Christianity would say, instead of thinking we're going to free ourselves from suffering, maybe the path to that is actually to accept suffering, to, as Jesus says, to pick up your cross and follow me, and just get used to accepting suffering.
Great question. Thank you, Ella. Rinpoche, do you want to start with a response to that?
I think that's, that's, important question. And it's not an easy question to answer, because it is something that that's more kind of to do with our own experience. And it's not, all these different methods and teachings and all these things are there, I think, to help us, step by step, to work on. Even like accepting the suffering, is, I think, is one first step Because, you know, if you have like lots of people don't even understand how much problem and suffering there is in the world. So therefore, you know, even a little problem or little kind of difficulties becomes a very big problem to them. And so therefore, you know, it becomes much more suffering. You know, sometimes people come to me in Europe, especially in the winter, and tell me that, you know, oh, I'm going to kill myself because I've lost my boyfriend, I've lost my job, so there's no reason to live. I usually tell them that, okay, if you really want to kill yourself, nobody can stop you. But before doing that, why don't you go to India for a visit? And sometimes they do. And they come back. Smile from here to here. And I say, what happened? They say, oh, I nearly died. I got Delhi belly and I'm still having problem. You know, they stopped thinking about dying because they've seen so much suffering, so much problem there, that they realized, you know, how fortunate they are in their place. So therefore, sometimes, you know, just understanding and accepting what, you know, the situation, that is also one step. You know, it's not that it's going to get rid of all the problems. So in this way, you know, step by step, like getting rid of, you know, ignorance and craving and all these kind of things is not an easy thing, because this is something that we have very deeply in us. It's like, you know, most deepest kind of, you know, you have like, you get, what you call it, you have some like, you have some drug or something like that, and you become, you know, intoxicated, and you become, I forget the word.
Like addicted, is that the word?
To it. You get addicted to it. And even if you get addicted to it for a short time, it takes very difficult to get rid of it. So all these kind of problems that we have is not that like, it's maybe you can see from this point of view, life after life, you know, many lifetimes. And then, so therefore to get rid of them cannot be that easy. So therefore, you know, I think we need to go step by step. And if we do something that make us slightly better, one step forward, and then appreciate that, instead of thinking that, you know, we are never going to get anywhere, because we sometimes expect too much, you know, like in our life, like even to be able to get a kind of a job, how many years we have to train, and how many, you know, how much part of our life we have to spend just to, you know, say like become an engineer or a doctor or something like that. So this is not about that. It's about something to kind of completely, you know, free ourselves from completely sources and roots of all our suffering and pain and problem should not be or would not necessarily be that simple and that easy. So therefore, I think if we can be, a little bit less expecting and step by step, a little bit, if I can find a way to, to relax, for instance, not to worry too much, not to become, a little bit more kind of contentment or, anything, that I can allow my mind to whatever comes up to let it come and let it go. Something like that, There was I read the story that there was a person and he had, he had lots of problems. He had this problem number 1, problem number 2, and he had 10 different problems or many more than that. So he was very, very unhappy most of the time. And then, one of his friends one day told that, there is somebody, a very wise man coming in your area. Why don't you go and ask for some advice? He said, no, I have so many problems. Nobody can solve it for me. He said, why just, there's you can lose nothing. Just so he went there and asked this person, and this person said, can you see the colors? He got very angry. He said, of course I can see the colors. I'm not, I'm not blind or something like that. Why do you ask these questions? I have so many problems. If you have nothing to say, I will go. He said that, well, in this room, there are many colors, So you can see red colors? He says, yes, I can see red colors. How many red colors there are in this room? And he looked and he said, there are, 10 or 12 red colors. And then he said, but how many blue colors there are? He says, I didn't look, I didn't count. So I don't know. He said the same way. You've been just thinking and counting and focusing on all your problems. Therefore, you know all the problems and you have been facing them. How many good things you have in your life? He says, maybe there are some, I don't know. He said, go away and just count them and then come back. So next day he came back and says, actually, I have lots of good things, positive things also. So I said, look, you have to do that. So, sometimes a little bit the different ways of looking at things can also help a little bit. So, like that, step by step, there are different, I'm sure it's the same with Christianity. In Buddhism, like there are lots of problems that can be solved by understanding and seeing and, having good insight. But then there are lots of things that doesn't solve. You have to go deeper. These are kind of things that can be solved with insight. Then there are lots of things that can be solved with meditation and deep meditation. Then there are also others which are even deeper and even like more conscious, more unconscious level, more deeper level. So all these things, take lots of time and, know-how and things like that. So I think from Buddhist point of view, it's like that.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So next questioner is Jean Zucchini. And do you have a question? Who do you have a question for? Who would you like to put a question to, Jean?
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. First of all, it's a thank you and much gratitude for Ringu Tulku. Bless you.
Thank
for
you.
introducing me to the Mary Magdalene text. It was one of your teachings on this particular text. And I was saying a thank you to David for hosting the Zoom. And he said, oh, there's a book about it. And you can get it on Amazon. And I got the book and it should have had a government health warning because I've been attached to it ever since. couldn't get enough of it. So it was through your introduction. The next thank you is for Jim with his one-liner. We do not know what is in our mind until we project. So that's a mind pill for my meditation. So thank you for that. A request for David to put the IBN Arabic poem in the chat or send it out to the group email, as it's
Why don't I do? I'll send it out by email to everyone so they can have a hard copy. Yeah.
A big thank you to Joe for that wonderful way of telling us how to read stories, not just the surface reading, but read between the lines and meditate on the hidden pages or the missing pages. And the last thing, possibly
we've lost.
that you host in each month.
You've been free. You froze then, Jeannie, for the last thing. Can you just stop video and then speak, and then we'll hear you, because that tends to free up the bandwidth.
I'm still moving here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you again now.
Oh, good.
Yes.
The last thing was, could you possibly tell us, David, about your monthly studies on Zoom on the Mary Magdalene text that you do?
Oh yes, I'll put details of that in an email as well. So I do hold a monthly study group.
It's a wonderful rabbit hole to go down. It's so, in the darkness of the rabbit hole, there's so much light through these teachings. It's life-changing. They're absolutely wonderful. But what is it, 2-3 years?
Yeah, it's 2 years since Rinpoche.
And it's Ringu Tulku who was the key to taking me through the doorway down to the rabbit hole. Into the darkness where the light was. So thank you, everybody. Much gratitude from Northwest UK.
Thanks, Jean.
So
Morgana, you're next with a question. What's your question, and who would you like to put the question to, Morgana?
Well, I don't have a question. I have a comment.
Okay.
To just the whole of what we've been hearing. I went to a place of what if, which often opens the windows on the discussion as to what we think it's really about. So I just want to share some what ifs. What if the fact, at least in the Western world, but I imagine all cultures have a sense of this in their own way, we are moving from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. We've got a toe already into the Aquarian energies. That's a change of consciousness. It's a change of the way we will view story, the stories we will tell. And it also, in my world, says there's more help than we know for all of these questions that people have been dealing with in here in terms of suffering and behaviors on the planet now, etc. That just by the fact that we live in this momentously huge galaxy of universes, there will be change that will affect us that has nothing to do with what we do. That's a personal belief. But what if that is a momentous moment that we're all alive in? From Pisces, with its way of being in the world and its extreme structures, religions, etc. My next one is, what if the story changes about the Magdalene? In the sense that with Jesus and his crucifixion and meeting him in the garden and their conversations, he essentially passed the baton to her and said the next age will come informed by the great, and I dislike this word, but I don't have another one, the great feminine. The feminine and masculine have been so misused. but this age of a new way. And you are the representative in the story that I brought in, Jesus, meaning the story he lived. Here's the baton. And now, what will your consciousness bring now? And I bring that up because there are so many people who are involved in, inspired by questioning through Mary Magdalene. Who was she? And what if she wasn't just the things that we were told? So I put that in. What if the baton got passed? Then how do we read her story? And then her gospel? And then how does it inform our openness to what is possible? And I can hear Peter and Andrew right here with me going, what are you talking about? So it's a very contemporary question right now. What are you talking about? So the last one to me would be, and what if we begin to hear all of this even more differently? The Gospel of Mary, and we're now looking through the lens of this gigantic change of an age that happens every 2,000 plus years. And what if it wasn't just a question of Mary carrying the message that Jesus had forward, but then it gets even expanded more by the presence of, if I can be so bold, Joe talking about the descent into the deep. I would call it the deep divine feminine. So that's my offering. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your offering there, Morgana. And moving on to Anasuya, you have a question. I'm looking at the time and there's 8 minutes left. Do you have a question for someone on the panel, Anasuya?
I heard you. Hello, everyone. I'm just piping in to say how wonderful the presentations were today. Thank you so much, Joe, for expanding in so many ways how to understand the text. I loved it. For me, this is the gift of today is the reminder of something we say in the Black church, which is, this too shall pass. So that we don't keep focused on whatever is happening in the moment of our suffering, of our challenges, is real, that it's going to stay that way. And that understanding of the temporality of things has helped in our survival, because some of the things we've had to endure have been absolutely horrific. And so Jesus and Mary Magdalene lived and learned and taught under great oppression of empire. And in this era that we're in, that's called Kali Yuga, where the most adharmic things are happening all the time as normal, as justice, as right, as truth, when everything is flip-sided, when wrong is right and bad is good and evil is celebrated. We're in this era of Kali Yuga where it is so hard to believe there is a God, to believe there is wisdom, to believe there's a balm in Gilead. And the gift of Kali Yuga, though it may be hard to see that could be one, is that the smallest act of faith, of reverence, of awe, of hope is magnified 1,000,000 times, because it is so hard even have a grain of faith in this time. So be it this text, as the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or wherever else we're able to say, God help, God is real, be with me, reveal to me, show me how. We take one step to God, God takes a million toward us because it is needed. It is not hard to have faith in such an era. And here we have gathered today or this weekend to embolden each other's faith, to keep reaching out and believe that we are enough. We are enough to spread that joy and that hope that the suffering we're in shall pass, this too shall pass. And the joy is in the knowing that in the darkest time, as Rinpoche says, in Kali Yuga, the termos is that God will already reveal himself. God always, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, in the worst of times, I will always come back. I will always incarnate in the worst of times when it is needed. And we're it. We are that reincarnation. We keep looking for the Messiah outside of us, but we're it. May we remember that and offer the gift of our walk, our questions, our queries, our struggles, and our joys to one another to keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia. I guess we've got 3 minutes left. There's time for one more question. Does anyone have one last question for the panel?
I was hoping you could answer the question, David, that someone asked, what actually is the good news of the gospel? What, for you personally, what has been the good news?
Personally, put on the spot. What's the good news for me personally? I think the biggest news for me, not just in the gospel, but out of the character of Mary Magdalene, is she's the person who stays present through all suffering and doesn't try to run away from it. So she sets an example and a model. So she's the one that doesn't waver. She has a stability, an ability to stay present, whatever's happening, and not to try and shy away from that and not to flee from that. So my biggest take home from the whole story of Mary Magdalene personally is to know that I personally feel accompanied by her. I personally feel that there's someone that's with me, whatever happens, and that gives me confidence and peace. So that's my good news. Thank you for asking the question. So we're coming to the end now. So it just leaves for me to massive word of thanks to everyone who has been speaking this evening, to people who've asked questions and added their own comments to the conversation. Also, a quick word to say a big thank you, because everyone that's here has donated to Ringu Trust, which is a charity that I've had close involvement with for many years, and it does massively good work in a very direct, practical, grounded, real way with the rural poor in a village in Tibet. And so over the years that has funded a health clinic, it's funded a school and maintained those for many years now. And so in terms of a direct practical thing that we can take from this evening is we've done some good, and that's a thing to celebrate. And I'd point you towards the website for Ringu Trust and invite you to take a look and see what good work your dollars have done. So thank you all for that. And I have recorded this evening, so I will. I've recorded it onto this laptop, and so I'll sort of gives me the chance to sort of edit it a bit and tidy up the edges, and then I'll probably post it, I think, on YouTube, because there's been so much valuable discussion that it feels like something to be archived and watched time and again. So thank you all very much, and and blessings to all. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.